gonna teach you how to dance? Who's gonna show you how to fly? Who's gonna call you on the lame dope smoking slacking little sucker you are?
A fellow atheist YouTuber by the name of Godless Cranium put together a video recently where he asked some of the theistic YouTubers what were some of the things that atheists say that just cause them to switch off. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that cause them to switch off are valid arguments or even mocking points that do make sense. So I thought I'd go through and quickly look at the things that they said. However, the audio, for most of them, pretty much all of them, is really fucking terrible, and I don't want to subject you to it. So I will attempt to characterize the arguments that they've made and summarize them in a nice short way, and they or someone else can pick me up if I've mischaracterized them, but I'm really not going to subject you to that terrible audio. God apparently hates microphones and amps. Who knew? Gnostic Mysticism, who for God knows what reason decided to record his reply outside, is concerned that we are somehow throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that in our criticisms of organised religion we're also tossing out what he calls real or genuine spirituality. One could not possibly cover every single personal iteration of irrational belief in detail. The organised religions are bigger, they have dogmas, in many ways it's easier, but the fundamental and central problem of religion is that people believe nonsense for no reason, and that's no different for your manner of mysticism, which you, judging by your name, you ironically call Gnostic. The word spirituality itself barely means anything. It's like an empty bag into which people can stuff whatever they like. Art, music, religion, drug use, whatever it is they want. And because of that, because it can mean anything, it essentially means nothing. So, you have to define your terms. But we toss out all of this stuff for usually the same reason, because we're all skeptics, and because, well, not all of us, but enough of us are skeptics that it matters. You have no evidence for the things that you claim. That's the basic problem. You're operating on faith just the same as someone with a specific dogma. The burden of proof is yours. Bring your evidence. Until then, yeah, of course, anything and everything that you suggest that has no evidence for it will be tossed out. That's the rational thing to do. Philosophy Tiger, whose studio is apparently at the bottom of a crisp packet, is a bell-end and a bit of a vroom fondle who is involved with the whole red pill religion nonsense, so that you know right off the bat that he's a dishonest, disingenuous fuck muscle. As such, his big complaint is that atheism is the absence of belief in God, which he regards as a useless definition for some reason. He's a living example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, an avatar of it. You don't get to tell us what we believe and don't believe. You also don't get to redefine terms in ways that you would like. You often refer to the Stanford Encyclopedia as your one authoritative source, but many other things, such as the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy and many other references, do now accept that the absence of belief in God is a definition of atheism. It is the most all-encompassing definition of atheism, taking in, as it does, Gnostic and agnostic atheists, strong and weak atheists, positive and negative atheists, atheists of all stripes. Whether they actively believe there is no God, or they just lack belief in God, that covers it. So long as you don't believe in God, you are an atheist. Is this a useless definition? No. The point is that the burden of proof is upon you as a theist. You have to make your case for the existence of a God, and it has to be convincing and evidenced and supported. And so long as it isn't, we suspend our belief. Now, I'm both an agnostic atheist and a Gnostic atheist, depending on what God definition or whatever we're talking about. If you try to assert an all-powerful God, an omnipotent God, then that is logically impossible, so that God does not exist. I can make a positive assertion on that and point out why. The old rock so heavy argument, for example. If you try to say that humans have free will but God is omniscient, that's impossible, that's a paradox as well, so I can say that God does not exist. But to the overall ambiguous, nebulous, ever-changing, ever-shifting definition of God, whatever that might be, I just withhold belief until you make your case. So the assertion here is that, I guess, an argument or an assertion must be supported before belief is justified. So you might get further if you actually characterize the argument correctly. Classical Theist takes issue with kind of his own complexity argument. Many theists argue that the world is so complicated and intricate and so on that it must have been made. And many atheists counter-argue with the point that if the complexity that we see in the universe requires a creator, then any creator would have to be complex, and so would in turn require a creator by that same argument, and thereby you fall into infinite regress. Classical Theist, on the other hand, calls back to an old argument, arguing that God is somehow something simple, the simplest thing. Merely asserting that God is simple, or the simplest thing in existence, isn't going to cut it. When you look at examples of other creative beings, such as humans, you can see that they are complicated, and all the apparatus and so on required to be creative, to puzzle things out, to make art or uncover science or whatever. This requires a complicated neurological structure, it requires senses, it requires will, and self-direction and so on. So if that requires a creator, then that creator must require a creator. Just saying it's simple isn't going to do, because that act of creativity, the intelligence and so on required, apparently by your argument, not mine, to come up with the universe and everything, necessitates a degree of complexity. So this just doesn't make any sense from your point of view. From the scientific point of view, complicated things tend to come from simpler things, so it makes sense in that basis. But then we're not saying that there's any directing intelligence or design or plan behind anything. You are. Those aspects would require some kind of complex mind. So you can't get out of this argument just by saying that God is easy, God is simple. It's not going to work. Antonio's problem is that we call God Invisible Sky Daddy, which seems kind of a petty thing to complain about, but there you go. I don't know how familiar you are with the concept, but when we call God Invisible Sky Daddy, we're mocking you. Ridicule is the only weapon that may be used against unintelligible propositions, as Jefferson said. And he was referring to the Trinity, but then in your kind of argument around this, you refer to the Trinity, so it seems a particularly apposite quote to use in this context. The God that most people assert is invisible, intangible, cannot even be detected via works. Some even suggest that testing God is blasphemous somehow. Most people's conception of God is this invisible, intangible, outside space and time force that somehow influences this universe. Never mind the fact that that's a contradictory definition in and of itself. And sky, you say that people are confusing heavens and heaven, but in depictions, in people's thoughts and so on, that heaven is up there and hell is down there. This is common enough. So it's slightly mocking, but there's no confusion. It's taking the piss out of what you believe and say. And Daddy, well, you refer to Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. You believe it's the creator of all and all the rest of this. So it's mocking, it's making fun of you, it's ridiculing you, but it's not really inaccurate at all in describing what people believe. It's just describing it in a mocking tone. If you don't want people to make fun of your beliefs, have less silly beliefs. Roman Catholics' issue is with counters to the cosmological argument. He doesn't seem to like the way in which atheists point to the contradictions, problems, and infinite regress in the cosmological argument, and tosses a whole bunch of word salad and apologia at it. The cosmological arguments and all their various ilk are trash and indefensible, and it's all contained within their internal claims. They contradict themselves, they ruin themselves. If you say everything requires a first cause, which is the general first starting point for these kind of arguments, if everything requires a cause, then your ultimate cause must also require a cause, and so that goes on forever. If you say everything except God requires a cause, which is the Kalam cosmological argument, then that's so obviously special pleading, it shouldn't even need pointing out. And furthermore, you've shown that not everything requires a cause, and if you're going to make one exception, the possibility for other exceptions exists, and therefore you've negated the necessity of a god. And it doesn't matter how much you dress this up, it doesn't matter how much word salad you throw at it, it doesn't matter how confusing you try to be and in trying to obfuscate the point. It always contradicts itself that way, however it's phrased, whichever version of necessary being or whatever else you throw at it, it's always going to have one of these same two problems: infinite regress or self-negation, and there's just no way around it. Get better arguments. Alias makes the same point about the invisible Sky Daddy being dismissive and insulting, and absurdly compares it to the N-word, shall we say. Since I've already covered this, I'm not going to cover it again. What these objections, these things that make theists tune out, appear to be to me is a combination of things. Petulance, that the arguments that they think are knocked down and brilliant, like the cosmological argument, get dismissed so easily. They think they've got this great argument, and they think there's more depth to it than there is, and it just gets beaten down from the get-go. Yeah, that seems to be the main issue for them. Philosophy Tiger is just a moron, an absolute fucking moron, and it just refuses point blank to accept what atheism is. This is a big problem with the rest of the Red Pill religion crew. They will not argue you where you are. They will try and argue something else. It's a fundamental straw man that they keep putting forward. And if they want to have meaningful discussion, like they keep saying they do, they would drop that and they would meet atheists where they live, just as atheists meet theists where they live, even though it's constantly shifting all over the place. So there's that. The rest, they don't like their beliefs being ridiculed, but ridicule is a powerful tool. It's a powerful weapon. It can often force people to try and defend the indefensible, and that's a way of cracking through and making them realise that what they're trying to defend is indefensible. Look, that many of the things you believe are absurd, ridiculous, unevidenced, nonsensical. And I can't help but go back to the Jefferson quote again and again and again. The ridicule is often all there is, because your ideas are so incoherent, irrational, illogical, unevidenced, that what else is there left to do? There is nothing of substance to argue, to interact with, to even debunk quite often. And so there's nothing left. Take care. Zang.
I'm an urban animal, one step from a cannonball.